Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Please bear with me. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so if you can't hear me or I cough, just give me a high sign, and I'm happy to repeat anything. I like to be pretty informal in my talks, and what I want to do is really just share with you my story, and then leave plenty of time for you to ask questions. I think probably the most useful use of our time is just for me to be able to share and impart to you any wisdom that you might take forward in the things that you're doing. So I wanted to take sort of an informal poll. How many in here are undergrad? Okay, so that's a lot. And how about graduate? MBA or something else?
PhD.
PhD, okay. And how about, did you raise your hand? MBA or?
Yes.
Okay, great. And anybody else just from the community or professors? Cool, great. So that's really fascinating to me and actually really heartening. When I was in school, I had absolutely no concept of entrepreneurship. I guess I sort of understood it on a really abstract level, but did not really see it as a potential career path for myself. I had a liberal arts education. I went to a very small school in Connecticut, and I studied political science, I studied human rights, I studied economic development, I studied women's rights, and I was so passionate about that. And I really felt like, or I really thought that the only path forward for me with that type of education was to go into development work, to work for a nonprofit, to work for an NGO. And I had every intention of doing that when I graduated. Of course, fate kind of stepped in, and I couldn't really find a job in any of those fields that really spoke to me. I was either going to end up kind of in a cubicle somewhere in DC or Geneva, or I was going to have to strap on some flak gear and head to Kabul to work for Doctors Without Borders. And neither of those was truly appealing. So I actually took a job with a tech startup in Philadelphia. And I started as an intern. I was paid $1,000 a month. It was really, really exciting, and also sort of what the fuck is this? It was, at that stage, it was about 30 people in a beautiful office. The company had been through several rounds of funding already, and it was just hugely exciting to be part of this team, however sort of disorienting. And in the period of just a few months, I went from sort of intern status to going out and raising money with the CEO. And it was this incredible opportunity to learn alongside somebody who was out there, creating something from nothing. And it was just so exhilarating. And on top of that, this company was fulfilling a social mission as well. They were promoting a lifestyle of sustainability. And so I saw this amazing sort of connection that could be made between a for-profit business and a social mission, and a social benefit to society. And I thought, how incredible is that you could harness something as powerful as a market to generate a social good, and let that social good be dictated by the power of the market as opposed to a donation or a one-time gift. So kind of from that moment I was hooked. But again, I had no formal training in entrepreneurship, in business. I really started with nothing. And I just really soaked up all that I could, and I hustled. And after about a year with that company, they ran out of money, which was also a really good lesson. I decided I was ready to start my own business, go out on my own, and I started a sustainable clothing company in London with a business partner. And kind of a weird leap from tech, from economic development to tech to clothing. But I was very, very passionate about the environmental and social impact the garment industry was having on developing economies, and particularly women in developing economies who are the major workforce in that industry. And I wanted to, again, kind of utilize a for-profit model and leverage that to provide some sort of environmental or social benefit. So I worked on that with my business partner for almost 2 years, and we launched several collections in London. Critical acclaim. We were doing really well, and the long and short kind of tragic end to that story is that I couldn't get an entrepreneurial visa to stay in London. And so I had put in 2 years of work and huge amounts of capital, sweat equity, and I was like being deported. So that was sort of the end of that ride. We talked about moving it here. We talked about me sort of being bicontinental, and truthfully, I think I knew in my heart that fashion wasn't really going to make the kind of direct impact that I was really going to be satisfied with. You had kind of a really long chain to get from the women in Bangladesh that were working at this sustainable, ethical workshop to the woman in London who was buying this beautiful dress. And I really felt like I needed to find something that had a much more direct focus. So I came back to the Philadelphia area, and I sort of was floating around a little bit. And I think that was a really interesting moment because my mind was really free. And I think that's a really important thing for any aspiring entrepreneur. And I'm sure many of you already are sort of percolating entrepreneurial ideas or even starting your own ventures. But I think, kind of allowing yourself to go quiet sometimes and really let those ideas churn and kind of germinate is so important. And so in that period for me, I kind of reassessed what was important to me and the things that I was really interested in. And I went back to my days in college, and I thought about what I was truly passionate about, what really lit my fire. The things that, when I had a choice, were the things that I was choosing to do. I mean, college is this amazing moment in time where you can choose exactly what you want to do, and that's what you do. And it's not about what kind of paycheck it can give you or what kind of lifestyle it can offer. It's really truly about what lights you up. And so it came back to women and economic development, and how do you empower a group that has been disempowered in such a radical and immense way throughout the world. And I had sort of known about the issue of menstruation from my research and days in school, and it never really hit me that hard when I was in the classroom, truthfully. But as I thought sort of more about what my next steps would be, I started sort of digging and just paying more attention to what was going on around me. So I was like, paying a lot more attention to what was going on in the news and what was being written in the New York Times op-eds. And I was reading the New York Times Magazine, and Nicholas Kristof, wrote a huge feature on women, and he mentioned as part of that that girls were missing school every month, for days every month, and often eventually dropping out because they had no way to manage their periods. And immediately I thought of Tom's shoes. I've been a huge supporter of Tom's shoes for years, and I essentially thought, why not apply that model to these products that women in my society buy all the time, and tie that to products being provided for girls in school. So essentially that started what has been a 2-year journey to get from idea to where we are now. And it's definitely been kind of like a long path, potentially longer than it has needed to be, but maybe not. But the first year, really, after I came up with this idea, was spent just traveling and researching and networking and meeting people and really trying to figure out if this was even a viable concept. And it wasn't until about a year into it that I finally launched a pilot. I found a group of women who were willing to kind of be my guinea pigs, and I just started shipping. I just started trying things out, and I think that's probably, if I could impart one piece of advice, it's find your minimum viable product and just start shipping. So ran a successful crowdfunding campaign, brought on a whole group of new customers as a result of that, got major media coverage, national media coverage, online media coverage, and was approached by a handful of investors who said, we love what you're doing and we want to invest in you. And raising a seed round was always kind of in the back of my mind as what the next step might be, and that crowdfunding really catalyzed that. It was sort of a proof point for investors, and that's a really difficult thing at an early stage. If you're thinking that you're going to be sort of a mid-growth or a high-growth company, you're going to end up raising money at some point, most likely, whether to get started or just to scale. Excuse me. So that was really, really interesting. The way that the dynamic shifted from me thinking I was going to have to go out and sort of, stalk these investors, which I had done in this previous tech company, and it was just this long process, and you're always sort of like on the wrong end of things. And so it was really nice to be on the other side of things where you had actually proven that you could get out and get in front of people and hustle, and that people were behind your idea enough to give you some money. So I would definitely sort of recommend that. It's sort of a very interesting way. And I was just out at a conference in San Francisco, and the founder of Indiegogo was one of the speakers, and she spoke to the same point, was just the way that companies that had raised on their site had gone on to either raise more capital or get partnerships that might not have been an option if they had just approached that partner kind of cold without being able to prove their concept. So, I think, maybe I'm harping on it too much, but that was really a turning point in my company. It just really accelerated things in a way that I really didn't expect. So right now we're raising a seed round, raising $500,000 to get through the next 18 months and essentially validate the handful of assumptions that we have about who our customers are, what our channels are, who our market is. It's really exciting. So, that's my story, and I would just love to take questions and try to answer any questions you might have.
So you said coming out of school you didn't really have any of this business knowledge. So you learned all of this like with the seed, how to use your seed money and all that from the startup and then your clothing line?
Yeah, and I would say probably mostly at that startup. I mean, the startup experience was really interesting because I was working with a very seasoned CEO. So, I was sort of having exposure to the broad range of things that a startup CEO has to manage. So everything from kind of overseeing the user interface and making sure that, we're kind of targeting the right channels to creating investor decks, creating financial projections, doing all of that sort of nitty-gritty stuff that you have to do. But again, like, I wasn't even necessarily doing that stuff. I was just sitting in the room being shown how to do it. And then obviously having my clothing line was the first opportunity to do it. But I would still say at that point, I was very reliant on sort of outside sources. And I think it was probably just my naivety and willingness to just like seek out an answer to a question that I had. If I didn't know how to do a 5-year financial projection, like, I Googled it or found a book and taught myself how to do it. And I would find advisors. That's another thing I would recommend is, whatever stage your idea is at, find other people who have done something similar or who you just respect and have done well in whatever field. I have an amazing, very active advisory board, and they sort of run the gamut of professionals, from CEOs who have successfully exited several companies to, the CEO of a branding agency to the director of campaign operations for a nonprofit. Like, it's sort of the people who most resonate with what you're doing and that you feel able to really connect with and learn from. I would definitely recommend that.
How did you find that group of advisors?
It was pretty organic, I have to say. You always want to ask people for introductions. You always want to ask people you meet. Ask your professors. Ask if you have other entrepreneurs that come in. Ask them for recommendations based on what you're doing of people that they know who might be a good advisor. And usually the process is just asking them to coffee or asking them to lunch, saying, I have this amazing idea and I want to run it by you. Would you be willing to give me 30 minutes or an hour of your time? And I would say that most people are pretty willing. But it's certainly, there's probably no playbook for that. Yeah.
What would you say is your marketing strategy going forward with spreading awareness and getting people to actually know about what you're doing?
Yeah. So at this stage, the marketing strategy, and again, like, I'll slide forward to, this is sort of my very abridged list of recommended reading. And these are just like, this is by no means exhaustive, but these are definitely the books that I tend to continually reach for over the last 2 years, or the last 3 or 4 years, truly. And right up at the top there is The Lean Startup. And that's a book that I definitely recommend. And sort of hand in hand with that is the Startup Owner's Manual. So Steve Blank is like probably one of the geniuses of Silicon Valley. He's been around for years and has had sort of some epic exits. And then the Lean Startup is Eric Ries, and he sort of took what Steve Blank wrote in the Startup Owner's Manual and made it really specific. But the concept there is minimum viable product and iteration. And so, that's really the stage that we're going into. And so in terms of marketing, the assumptions that we're looking to validate right now are that our customers exist on college campuses, that our customers exist in large organizations and corporations that sort of fall into a specific category of being socially conscious or sustainable, as well as patrons in lifestyle venues, so restaurants, spas, gyms, yoga studios. And so we've developed different initiatives to actually enter into all of those markets and see if those assumptions are right. They could be totally wrong, but that's the process right now.
You said you were inspired by Blake Mycoskie and Tom's. They produce their own brand of shoes. Do you produce your own brand of women's products, and how many women have you been able to help? So
it's a great question. Currently, we repackage an existing organic brand, and we do that where we essentially repackaged to our customer specifications. So where you used to have to go to a store and buy products off a shelf, with us you can say, I want 10 tampons, I want 5 maxi pads, and I want 2 panty liners, and that's what we'll send you every month. The reason for that was very deliberate, and I'll share that with you. When I was first starting out, I had every intention of manufacturing my own line of product, and so I got in touch with about half a dozen different manufacturers, and the minimum order that I would have to make was, a shipping container worth, and that was going to be about $250,000. So, without having a market, without having a distributor or a retailer nailed down, without having anything sort of validated, I was going to have to go out and raise that much money in order to get these products that I would then have to sit on until I could sell. So that to me was a pivot point. And if you're familiar with sort of agile or lean methodology, you'll know what that means. And essentially, I got to a point and it was sort of like a blocker. And so the option was to stop or to pivot and turn and go into a new direction. So that was really where the subscription model came from. I saw other companies utilizing subscriptions for like a variety of products, and actually I think it's turned out for the best because it's a hugely growing market, and it's definitely adding value for women in ways that just producing my own brand wouldn't have. And so back to your question, in terms of impact, the way that it works is that we've partnered with an organization on the ground that actually produces sustainable sanitary pads, and they set up local production units, they employ local women, and they set it up in a cooperative model. So, different from Tom's Shoes, and as much as I love them, this is something that they've gotten a lot of criticism for, is that they will take the thousands of shoes that they're going to donate and essentially flood a local market. And the argument there is that that's not sustainable because you are undermining the local economy. You're undermining local shoemakers. Now, whether or not there are local shoemakers and whether or not the people on the ground can afford those shoes is a different question. But essentially people have seen his model as being very flawed for that reason on the impact side. And so, I like to think that we have sort of overcome that. And essentially what we do is provide revenue to those small manufacturing cooperatives by buying from them at wholesale. Excuse me. So at this point, the number of products that we have actually purchased is in the tens of thousands. Yeah. And we're growing, so it's exciting.
Are there any opportunities to partner with companies that would be willing to give you some of their products in exchange for your profile of the products, as works with, let's say, like Box or any other similar model?
Yeah, so I actually tried that. Ultimately, I stopped doing it because I felt like if there wasn't value on both sides, that it really wasn't a good idea, or just wasn't worth doing. It's certainly something that I would explore later on, but I found it very, very interesting, especially given Birchbox's growth and scale, that was sort of the feeling among people who provided those products. Now, at this point, Birchbox is kind of gotten to a point where they're supplying samples from brands that, not getting a return on investment from those samples is probably not going to change their day very much. I'm very interested in the possibility of that for at least the tea and chocolate that we provide, because that would really kind of help our margins quite a bit.
I want to talk a little bit about your pricing model. I
Sure.
find that when students tend to start businesses, that's the one 4 Ps that they usually don't know too much about, and how you're able to do what you do, and what are some of the components that go into your pricing model to keep in mind if the student starts a business.
Yeah, so pricing is definitely more art than science, I think. I think it comes back to that original beta test. So what I did with that was I priced it at $1 per piece so if you needed 10 tampons, it was going to be $10 a month. If you needed 15, it was gonna be $15 a month. And so that allowed me to really gauge like what quantities women were buying on average, or if there were groups that sort of, given like free reign, what was the quantity that most women would assign themselves. And so it ended up being like pretty well split in 10, so 10 products, 20 products, 30 products. And so I established a tiered pricing model as a result of that. Originally I thought, well, I'll just charge one flat rate and you can order anywhere from 1 to 30 products and we'll leave it at that. And I really realized that was not like serving my customers best, especially the ones who didn't need 30 products. They kind of felt like they were being gypped. So I broke it down, and pricing is sort of like this is probably classic business school, although I don't know because I haven't been, but you take your costs and like what you need to make to break even and sort of what the market will bear, and you try and meet those things in the middle. And so I looked at what like similar companies were charging. I looked at again like what my costs were, how much I really needed to make, what kind of margins I wanted to make. And I definitely played around with it a little bit. At certain points it was like, my head kind of got in the way, and I was like, well, people won't pay that much for this, so I'm not going to charge that much. And I was like, well, I'm really never going to make any money if I charge that much, so let me like bump it up a little bit and see if it still goes. And it has, and I sort of got to the current pricing model, and it was like a little bit of a cringeworthy moment for me, because it was like, this is definitely a premium service. And you definitely have to be committed to the cause to pay for this. But what I found is that actually, like, I have never gotten a complaint from anybody about the price. There's always going to be sort of a spectrum of people who can afford what you're offering, who can't afford, who want it and can't afford it, who can afford it and don't want it. I think that it's a matter of playing around with it. I think you probably start high. It's easier to come down than it is to go up. And actually, it's interesting because we've now reached a point where we're going to lower our prices. So the pricing right now is based on, the price that we were paying for our raw products based on our small size. We weren't getting the price for an economy of scale. And now that we've gotten to a scale, we're getting products for a lower price, and we're going to actually bring our prices down in order to reach more of that mass middle market. So it's been really interesting, but pricing is definitely something that you want to test like anything else. And you can always do like A/B testing with pricing when you first start out. You can do kind of like one landing page that offers the product at one price and one that offers another, and kind of see where people land, or if there's a better response to one price over another. Is it evenly split? Like, is it different depending on which channel you're going after? For us, it's at this point, going after the college market. It's interesting because it's like, okay, there's this argument that they have less disposable income, but at the same time, what we're finding is that many times it's the mothers that are paying for it, and so they can afford it at sort of the normal price. And how do you kind of hit that sweet spot where you're kind of allowing for each to come in, and I would say it's definitely not something that I've totally figured out yet, but it's a process for sure.
Last question.
Yeah.
Did
someone else?
I was passing it to you.
Sure, okay. Can you tell us about your branding, what your image is and the tone that you've set? I was looking at your website and your personal site and your social media presence, and it's got kind of like a funky gypsy savvy chick thing. So
Am I giving that vibe off?
how you're having that executed and how you found people to work with that would get that weren't just pushing you to a Benetton image?
Right, yeah, sure. So I guess in terms of branding, the first thing I got really clear on was who my customer was. And I essentially figured out who my customer was, and I looked at other companies that she would patronize, and I sort of decided what the feeling was that I wanted her to have when she got to my page or got to, our Twitter account or was reading the post that we were putting up. And so, like, for me, it was a lot about what do we talk about, how do we say things, how do we phrase things, what do we not talk about, what do we not address. I think again it comes back to how do we want the customer to feel, how do we want them to feel when they walk away.
Excuse me, so did you approach it from an experience? So you said, you're thinking, what's their experience,
Yeah.
not what's their...
Yeah, I would definitely say I came at it from an experience side, and then again, like, kind of brought in other brands that I saw were doing a really good job of this and that I had been a patron of. I mean, I looked at Tom's Shoes, I looked at Warby Parker, I looked at Birchbox, I looked at Lululemon, I looked at Nike. So like, our brand is all about consciousness and empowerment and health. And I looked at different brands that were not necessarily kind of embodying all of those things, but that were embodying at least some of them. And so actually, like, we've just gotten to the stage where we're engaging an outside branding agency to sort of help us just crystallize everything a little bit better and tighten things up, and also just like have the brand evolve. It's been like pretty homegrown from until this point. We have a logo, we have a tagline, we sort of have our colors and our fonts and our phrases and our wording, and but there are so many other elements to branding, and so I think you can do it yourself to a point, and then it's probably a good idea to like bring in professionals and have them really bulk it up. But I would say from the beginning, if you just focus on those things, you're going to come up with something that is at least going to serve you well enough to get you that base of customers.